zoning for housing. These are where all the holdups are, but nobody really wants to talk about that. Everybody that's so ideologically driven to have an answer to this is like wants to push it in a different direction. Conservatives might want to talk about like, okay, fine, we need more houses, but the only houses they want to see are like single family homes with white picket fences. And then like for Dems are like, oh, we need to build low income housing. Why? No, you don't. People will pay for it. People will buy it. People will build it. It'll be there. It just needs to be zoned for it.
Are young Americans really worse off than their parents and grandparents, or is Scott Galloway just spinning a sensationalist tale for views? NYU professor Scott Galloway, also known as Prof G, recently set the internet ablaze with his provocative TED Talk, claiming that the young in America today...
They're doing more poorly than previous generations.
Am I making that clear?
Sure.
Basically, I'm asking you what you think people feel about the topic.
I think that the standard of living has increased pretty quickly. There's probably new expenses that we have today that people in the past didn't have. I don't know how much people were obsessed with keeping up with like the latest phone. There's a lot more temptations in spending money today. Like it's easy to pick up your phone and do Uber Eats or whatever. Just different types of money sinks, and there are more things that are geared towards like optimally draining you of your money. The unaffordability inside cities is probably getting worse than it was in the past because so many people are trying to move to these places, and by the laws of physics, you can only fit so many people in. There are no 160K homes today. Omaha, Nebraska, Zillow, Limfeo. I can find it.
The United States isn't building enough homes.
The amount of inventory that we've seen increase has taken the level of existing home inventory to 3.8 months. Normal is 6.
Builders completed over 1.5 million new housing units in the 12-month period that ended in July 2024. That still wasn't enough to end a housing shortage that's a decade in the making.
Not only were we underbuilding for a decade, but then you get to the pandemic and there's this massive rush on housing.
That's making home prices rise fast in many parts of the country.
So if you are waiting for that market to really dip, it's not going to happen. The reason for that is that we are so underbuilt.
Both 2024 presidential candidates have ideas to fix the housing market, but neither stance seems to prioritize a key underlying issue.
A lack of competition is also contributing to the low supply of housing.
Can politicians do anything about the housing shortage? And if so, why haven't they yet? For years, builders in the United States have made fewer homes than the U.S. needs. There are various estimates for the scale of the shortage,
which is estimated anywhere from 2 to 8 million. Some people put it at even 20 million housing units that we are short.
The shortfall in new construction sent home prices trending higher over the past decade. The typical newly built home in the United States cost about $417,000 in June 2024, a slight decline from 2022, when home prices averaged around $430,000. But the typical household only brought in around $75,000 a year in 2022, the most recent year with data available. Purchasing a home in many major U.S. cities would require over $130,000 in household income. Meanwhile, many people have 2024.
I don't like these two numbers being compared to each other. The median sales price for new houses sold in the United States. This is going to be your middle point for how much a house costs in the U.S. in June 2024.
A slight decline from 2022, when home prices averaged around $430,000. But the typical household only brought in around
real median income for U.S. households. How many of these include people that are already buying houses, or I'm sorry, already have a house? I feel like you could do a better cohort here. I don't think these two numbers are very good to compare. But I'm also curious, households, does this include people living in apartments? It must, right? Or is it literally just people that are buying or renting homes? Any housing unit. Okay. And then are households ever, do households include, if you live with roommates, are you all considered one household for income purposes? Like would they say this household makes $200,000 if you have 3 roommates and you all make $50K? Or is it only families and dependents and people like that? You talking about the real page stuff already? Nope. I don't even know what that is. They had an algorithm that is allegedly playing a massive role in driving up the rental market. Until I've seen something that's dramatically different than anything that's been presented before, anybody that tells you that the cost in rent or the cost in housing prices is being driven up by some insert whatever large corporation, they're almost always a propagandist. They almost always have no concept of anything relating to housing prices, and they're almost always fucking retarded. So, yeah.
$75,000 a year in 2022, the most recent year with data.
That chat is referring to the real page stuff going on right now. I haven't looked into the real page. I don't know what's going on right now. I just know in general, all of these things are ending up they're never as big of an issue as people seem to think they are. Justice Department sues real page for algorithmic pricing scheme that harms millions of American renters. The Justice Department, together with the Attorneys General of North Carolina, California, Colorado, Connecticut, filed a civil antitrust lawsuit today against RealPage Inc. for its unlawful scheme to decrease competition among landlords and apartment pricing and to monopolize the market for commercial revenue management software that landlords use to price apartments. Okay, this sounds like a piece of software that a bunch of different property managers use. And it sounds like the software is rigging or is colluding essentially to increase prices in markets. That's what I'm guessing. RealPage's alleged conduct deprives renters of the benefits of competition on apartment leasing terms and harms millions of Americans. The lawsuit was filed today in the U.S. District Court for the Middle District of North Carolina and alleges that RealPage violated Sections 1 and 2 of the Sherman Act. The complaint, do we need to read this? Should we read this? 115 pages. Holy shit. The software likely only has a very subtle impact on actual prices. No, anything more than a little bit would be obvious to spot. Maybe. My guess is the impact is probably not huge, but still very illegal and very bad, right? Are landlords not allowed to talk about their rents publicly without an algorithm? Well, my guess is this isn't having to do with talking about your rent. It's knowing what everyone else is charging for rent and then bumping your prices up a bit rather than being competitive, right? The RealPage website even advertises that they get 5% higher rental rates in the market. They boast about their price fixing. Just because you're saying you get higher rental rates doesn't mean you're price fixing. It could mean that you just have a way of finding better tenants or something or more quality. Like there are other. Why don't landlords use this to compete with each other? Okay. Ready? We're about to incorporate a lot of econ here, okay? So, close your eyes, come with me, walk with me. In an ordinary market where you have a high elasticity within a certain subsection of goods, so that means that, let's say that we've got soda pop or soda or whatever you want to call it, and you can choose between Coke and Pepsi, all right? We would say that there's a high elasticity. I hate USB, sorry. I don't know why this keeps coming in and out. I don't know why I keep doing this. This is triggering the fuck out of me. There's a substitution effect where if the price of one good increases too much, then the price of another good will be easily substituted. Is there a power surge at the port? No, the USB standard, a lot of people aren't aware of this, but USB cables have like little tiny accelerometers in them, and what they do is they detect anywhere along the cord where there's ever any movement, and if that happens, the entire thing just reconnects to the computer over and over and over again, just to with you. Pepsi, Coke. Cost of Pepsi doubles, sales of Coke is going to massively increase, sales of Pepsi is going to massively decrease, right? So high elasticity between the two, high substitution effect, okay? So ideally, assuming the market is functioning as necessary, these two people should be competing with one another, okay? High elasticity within this domain, okay? Meaning Pepsi goes up in cost, people buy less because there's a substitution product, people buy more Coke, etc., right? So there's an incentive to compete because they both want to sell things, and if they raise their prices too high, somebody will consume the other thing, okay? Now, that's true within the particular domain of these goods. Now, if you back up and you look at the general domain of goods, or the general, I don't know what the terms are here, but like if you look at all sodas and all pops, okay, the elasticity for these is a bit lower, okay? Somebody's going to be more willing to say, I won't drink Pepsi, but I will drink Coke. They'll be more willing to say that than they'll say, I'm going to not drink any soda or any Pepsi or any pop or anything at all, right? So the demand overall for soda is higher than the demand for a particular type of soda, right? That being said, it's still probably relatively elastic, and that if the cost of all sodas increases, eventually people are going to choose otherwise, okay? So this is kind of your mechanism for how these markets kind of sort of hopefully work in a perfect capitalistic society, okay? Within the subset of sodas, if Coke and Pepsi have a certain cost, if one is like, I'm going to just double the cost of my soda because fuck yeah, I'm going to make so much money. If they double the cost of their soda, okay, well, we're not buying your soda anymore. We're just going to buy Pepsi. It's like, okay, well, f you. But if Coke and Pepsi get together and like, we should both double the cost of our soda, and they both double it, well, now people are like, well, I don't need to drink soda if it's that expensive. I'm just going to buy juice, or I'm going to go buy something different. It's like, okay, well, fuck us, right? In housing markets, there is an okay substitution effect from one unit to another. Okay, you want to rent one apartment or buy one house, but it's too expensive. Oh, if you're going to jack your price up too much, I'm going to go buy something comparable for cheaper. So you've got high incentive in housing markets in that sense to compete with one another, because theoretically you can substitute one unit for another. However, the overall market is highly inelastic, meaning you have to have somewhere to live. At the end of the day, you got to buy something. It's unlikely that you're going to say, well, fine, rent is too expensive, mortgages are too high, I'm just going to be homeless. So because of that interaction, well, now we're in a world where if two apartments look at each other and they're like, hey, we control 80% of the units in the city, we should bump our prices up, right? If Pepsi and Coke do that, people go, okay, well, I'm just not going to buy soda, I guess. I'm going to go buy Sunny Delight. But if people in a housing market do this, well, you still have to have somewhere to live. Well, now you're kind of fucked. So the ability for people to collude here when there's a relatively inelastic demand for this sector of products is why there might not necessarily be a desire to compete if you can collude. Okay, sorry. A long way of answering the earlier question of why wouldn't they be competitive here? Because you don't have to be, because the overall demand for this class of good is inelastic. So there's a lot more opportunity for collusion and to make more money here if you're willing to price fix or collude, as opposed to doing it around a class of goods or services that are relatively elastic. Okay. Okay. That being said, I don't know 100% what's alleged in this complaint. I haven't watched it here, so okay. The thing you're reading says that RealPage was apparently using private info for this different type of problem. I don't know why that would change anything I just said, whether using private data, public data, or whatever. Private data might incorporate another level of illegality because the way that your price fixing is illegal, but it doesn't change anything fundamentally from what I just said. Just looking at a town in VT, the rental to vacation rental Airbnb ratio was like 1 to 100. I don't know what that means. There were, a lot of Airbnbs. Airbnb. Ugh. I'm so happy people are going back to hotels. I stopped using Airbnb like 3 years ago. Let's see, landlords regularly solicit and obtain non-public information about inquiries. They collect this information through a variety of means, including weekly phone calls, emails, and in-person visits. They share this information through Google Drive. Landlords not only knew of these so-called market surveys, but they expected their property managers to participate. For example, in January 2018, Landlord 2's Director of Revenue Management reached out to Landlord 1's Director of Revenue Management and asked about Landlord 1's use of auto-accept in YieldStar. In response, Landlord 1's Director provided Landlord 1's standard auto-accept settings, including daily and weekly limits, and for which days of the week auto-accept was used. The Landlord 1 Director, explaining why she provided this information, testified that the Landlord 2 Director was a colleague, even though Landlord 2 was a competitor to Landlord 1. In September 2020, Landlord 4's Director of Revenue Management reached out to Landlord 1's Director of its internal revenue management team. Landlord 4 asked Landlord 1, a direct competitor, which increases on renewal pricing Landlord 1 had seen in August, and offered what it had seen. Ooh, this sounds mega not okay. Or my guess would be that's not okay. Okay, thank you. All right, going back to watching this.
$1,000. But the typical household only brought in around $75,000 a year in 2022, the most recent year with data available. Purchasing a home in many major U.S. cities would require over $130,000 in household income. Meanwhile, many people have depleted their savings following the pandemic.
We're absolutely seeing a trend of consumers, home buyers, moving from California to the Southwest and Texas, moving from the Northeast to Florida and Georgia because of a lower cost of living, less state tax, better weather. About half of the new home sales in the country are in 10 cities, and that includes 4 cities in Texas. It's much faster to get zoning and entitlement improvement. And so as that happens, then you can move it through the cycle faster. Decisions from the Federal Reserve can affect the real estate cycle too. About 18 million households were priced out of home ownership between early 2022 and October 2022 as mortgage rates rose, according to the National Association of Home Builders. That economic tightening is slowing down the development of new housing too.
In the housing sector, investment stalled in the second quarter after a strong rise in the first.
There were fewer residential building permits.
You know what? You're right. 950 fixes the entire U.S. housing market. Ready? You're welcome. Just know that in the next 4 years, okay, when 99% of Americans are living in single-family homes with white picket fences, all right, with their 2 dogs, their 1 son and 1 daughter up front, running out to the school bus to go to their perfectly funded public school. It was because it happened here today on stream, okay? It happened here today on stream. Thank you, Aegon.
Issued, and fewer housing projects started in 2024 than there were in 2023.
The expectation, of course, is that the Fed will lower their rates in September. And while mortgage rates don't exactly follow the Fed, they are influenced by what the Fed does. So a lot of summer potential buyers were waiting till fall to see if rates would come down even more.
Some big builders have offered deals on mortgage rates to help home buyers bridge the gap. For example, the home builder D.R. Horton offered some buyers in the Reno, Nevada area a temporary 1-year 3.5% interest rate in 2023 before it rises to market rates over time.
Most of the big builders have their own mortgage.
You just got to keep this in mind. I don't know if they'll talk about this. I don't know if anybody gives a fuck. Maybe who cares? But like, remember that as you're doing all of this, you've got mutual things that are fighting each other, right? You're worried because houses are unaffordable, so you're doing all of these gimmicks to offer more houses, right? We can lower APR. Like we can, reduce interest. We can find, special first-time home buyer credits. We can do all these other things. As you do that, though, and more people are able to enter the market, demand is going to increase and housing prices are going to go up. You're not magically creating more inventory. So any incentive that you give for people to be able to buy and afford homes is going to drive up the prices as well, which is going to push some people out of the market. You're fighting against an impossible problem if you're unwilling to change the supply.
Mortgage company. It's called a captive mortgage business. They can buy down the mortgage rate. That is an advantage big builders have that smaller builders do not have.
There were over 400,000 businesses building homes in the United States in 2023. The industry remains fragmented, but the biggest firms have advantages that are helping them increase their control of numerous local housing markets. Just 10 builders are behind more than half of the new homes in 49 of 50 metro regions in the United States.
We're seeing cities like Tampa.
The answer is to just increase supply, right? Do Dems not like to mess with supply side stuff? The problem is that there's enough here that everybody can be mad about something without really wanting to figure out the problem. The issue is that from everything that I'm aware of, it seems to be the case that the free market actually solves for housing construction really well. The only roadblock is just zoning for it. If you zone for it and make it buildable, builders will come and build. Seems to be pretty easy. Landlords will come and rent. Property managers will come. Buyers, families will come. It's pretty easy to deal with that. But the issue is that zoning for housing and what kind of housing you zone for, these are where all the holdups are, but nobody really wants to talk about that because everybody that's so ideologically driven to have an answer to this is wants to push it in a different direction, right? Conservatives might want to talk about okay, fine, we need more houses, but the only houses they want to see are single family homes with white picket fences. If you say, okay, cool, let's zone for more high rises, conservatives what, liberal utopian megalopolises? That I'm not going to build another LA. It's okay, well, what do you want? Oh, you want more rows of single family homes in Montana? Congratulations, nobody gives a that everybody's so ideologically possessed to move in a certain direction for this is very hard to make any progress on the issue, I think. And then for Dems are oh, we need to build low income housing. Why? No, you don't. Who the cares what the income of the housing is? If you want, you can go build 50 million, $7,000 a month condos, and that would fix the housing problem. You don't have to build low income public housing. How stupid. People will pay for it. People will buy it. People will build it. It'll be there. It just needs to be zoned for it. It doesn't have to be low income. It could be medium or high, or it could be condos that are super expensive. Stuff will work. This is all good.
As an example, where today the top 10 builders have more than 80% market share. That just makes it very hard for any new builder to get a foothold.
If you look at relevant markets, well-defined for housing, then you see that in many places, it took the two firms that were merging from having 30% each to having 70 or 80 or 90% of the housing market. What's really critical here is the definition of a housing market. No matter how many developers you have building in San Francisco, if you live in the suburbs of DC in Virginia, those developers in San Francisco do not constitute a competitive threat to your market.
How will people pay for it if it costs too much? The same way that hermit crabs move into bigger shells. If you make it available, rich people, there's the consumption match between the buyer and the household right now is really bad too, right? In that there's probably wealthy people that would move into higher end units if they existed, but they're not even on the market, Yeah, shit would sort itself out. People will move. It's not like they're going to be unoccupied.
Just 100 home builders in the United States were behind about half of new single-family home sales in 2023, according to researchers at Johns Hopkins.
The top 10 builders combined had 10% market share. Today, only 3 decades later, the top 10 have 50% market share, and Horton, the biggest, has 15% market share. So the concentration has been accelerating. My team estimates that about 2/3.
Aren't you wrong? I thought studies have shown rich people buying homes and they stay empty as investment pieces, hence the reason for low-income housing. I've never seen that substantiated in a study ever in my life. The idea that you could buy property and just sit on it and you're making money on the appreciation of the asset without renting it, that seems impossible to me. If that was the case, the rental markets would be printing money hand over foot. It'd be like 100% profit margins if that was the case. I don't think that people just buy residential property and sit on it, except for maybe in ultra highly specialized circumstances. But as a general rule of thumb, no, I don't believe you can make money that way.
70% of the unit growth.
Hand over foot, hand over fist? I don't know. I don't even know what hand over fist means. This doesn't make any sense, okay?
That the big builders are delivering is from acquisitions.
The two biggest home builders in the United States are D.R. Horton and Lennar. Both have outperformed the S&P 500 between August 2014 and August 2024.
Their business is really going gangbusters, and if you look at the stocks, they're way up because they were able to grab such market share. A lot of the small to mid-sized builders just simply couldn't make the math work. Their borrowing costs were so high that a lot of them either went out of business or agreed to be purchased by the larger builders.
At the end of its 2023 fiscal year, D.R. Horton closed about 83,000 homes at an average price of about $382,000. D.R. Horton did not respond to CNBC's request for a comment. Lennar ended its 2023 fiscal year with about 73,000 homes delivered at an average price of $446,000. Lennar didn't provide CNBC with a comment on this story in time for publication. Both have acquired competing firms in the years after the Great Recession. For example, Lennar's 2017 takeover of WCI Communities. Lennar paid $643 million for the company.
Bro, the house I grew up in is like $1.4 million now. I'll never be able to afford what my parents could. Why not? What, are you less educated than your parents? Did they f up, or did you f up? Assuming you are working in similar jobs or working in a better job, you should be able to afford whatever your parents could. The idea that in the 40s and 50s and 60s, like every single family could easily afford like a family home with 2 or 3 bedrooms, and like this is just a myth. It's just not true. Homeownership rates have been about the same, I think, for the past from boomers to Gen X to millennials to Gen Z. The homeowner rates are about the same, I think. The last read something. What's the name of this website? I think it was the last report I read on this, but
company, approximately a 37% share.
Wrong, no shot. Yeah, I know. Housing is boring to argue about. All you guys have are your feelings. I don't know what to say to you. If you want to like me to study you some data, you can, but you won't because you're wrong. And you're just repeating what you heard on Reddit, but I don't know what you want me to say. Yeah, sorry.
Their price premium. The transaction combined 2 of the largest home builders in Florida.
This whole structural change in competition came from a very difficult situation that started in the Great Recession. If you have a great crisis, who are the players that can withstand the crisis?
I think by age, aren't Zoomers doing better? I feel like you pulled up a graph. Yeah, I think Zoomers are doing slightly better than millennials, but that's because my people entered the housing market like right after the big collapse in 2007. So shit was like wacky as fuck. So I think Zoomers are a little bit ahead of millennials, but it'll probably all average out. It'll probably all come to about, moving on track.
And actually survive are those that are bigger, that have more access to capital. But not only that, a lot of them were receiving a massive liquidity boost from stimulus packages in the early 2010s.
Do you think that inelasticity you talked about applies to the labor market? Do companies collude to keep labor costs down? I think that can happen. Yeah, this is probably why labor unions are probably important as a counterbalancing mechanism. It's not so much even that they have to collude, so much so that it's hard to travel for work, right? Like if you work a certain type of job and there's an employer near you that's 5 miles away, and then the next employer is like 20 miles away for the same type of work, you're kind of fucked. Like they don't have to compete as much with each other, so you're a little bit bonered there.
The 13 largest home builders received around $2.4 billion. They could use these resources in any way they wanted.
In the intervening years, D.R. Horton, PulteGroup, and other big builders struck mega deals too. Experts believe that the industry became less productive as its lead companies consolidated.
The average builder, when I started in the early 90s, would tell the consumer that they would deliver the house in 40 or 50 days. Over the course of my career in the last 30 years, that went from weeks to months. So it's incredibly unusual that you have an industry.
Homes here about 10 times more expensive than 30 years ago. Wages haven't risen like that. I think wages have I think they've about kept up. I'd have to go and check. I think the things that have outpaced wages the most, I think, were education and maybe healthcare. Housing might have a bit, but not as much as people say. I know the education is a big one, but even at that, actually, I'm not even sure for education because I don't know if that's just sticker price or if that's like the actual cost that people pay or the amount that people pay.
Industry where you have negative productivity, essentially, where it's getting longer versus shorter. To be honest, it's not like the house is super more efficient or more tech friendly than it would have been before.
They're also able to bring down their own costs because they've simplified the models of the home. There are far fewer actual floor plans and models that you can choose from.
There would be 10% more housing built if we had the levels of competition of 2006. Are they getting large?
Dog, the last time you worked a real job or had to really grapple with any of these issues, the world was a much different place. Correct. Back then, you couldn't see every single person bitching about every single possible problem they had in life at any single point in time on social media that was all making money amplifying these exact same complaints to you. That is correct. That's why as a 35-year-old person, I have to deal with you retarded fucking Gen Z dipshits talking about how back in my day, you could work a minimum wage job and easily afford an apartment or a house. That's not true. Minimum wage when I was a kid was $5.15 an hour. I had roommates my entire life. But you guys see like a thing online, and then you guys are all like, you're like college grads and shit. You guys are entering the job market making 50, 60, 70,000 a year, and you're like, oh my God, it's impossible to compete today because I've got $26,000 of student loan debt and I'm going to be fucked for the rest of my life. It's like, what do you mean fucked? How are you fucked right now? It's like, well, I the apartment I've got is so small. Like, bro, you live in a major city. You have a job that's in your major. You're like on track to be making, more money than your parents did. You finish your degree. Like you have, like, you're doing fine. Everything is okay. You're doing okay. You're doing fine. If we're living in an economy right now where the majority of people getting Uber Eats and DoorDash are poor people and those businesses are like thriving, we're doing fine. Okay, something is not connecting here with the math. And I understand you consume social media and you think everything's horrible and your friends say it's horrible and all of you complain all the time and that's all you see all day in and day out. But none of the numbers back up any of the things you're saying ever. I just don't know. Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
Because they want to, maximize profits. Well, all firms want to maximize profits. It's something that we expect, and that's why we have antitrust regulation and regulators. And that is where maybe the regulators should have been a little more strict.
President Biden made competition a focal point during his time in office.
In Cali, there's a big problem within unions filing sham environmental litigation /CEQA claims against housing developments, which they were not hard to work on, stalling new housing starts. Maybe.
Lead regulators
I don't know how much
in
that
the
affects things,
Federal
but
Trade Commission and Jonathan Cantor at the Department of Justice have taken a sharper stance on business mergers. Observers on Wall Street believe that a Harris administration could take a different approach to antitrust policy.
They feel confident at some level that she's going to maybe have a lighter touch on regulation.
The policies from the federal government especially that are aimed at increasing housing supply should also look at competition.
On the campaign trail, Vice President Kamala Harris has called for subsidies to help builders construct 3 million new homes. If approved, the tax credit would go to builders who sell starter homes to first-time homebuyers. Harris has also called for $25,000 in down payment assistance for some first-time homebuyers and rent caps on corporate landlords.
We will take on corporate landlords and cap unfair rent increases.
The Biden-Harris administration has also awarded transportation grants to communities that allow more dense housing construction. And they've asked Congress to provide a one-year $10,000 tax credit for homeowners who sell starter homes to other owner occupants. That can increase the number of pre-existing homes on the market, but also risks increasing demand for housing.
Hey guys, I lucked out on streaming when I was working as a carpet cleaner, so now I'm a millionaire and don't have to worry about price increases. You're all fine. So I bought my first house with Rachel, my girlfriend, when I was 19 years old, working at a casino, and I ended up quitting college in order to afford that. That's great. I like that you're projecting your life circumstances onto me, but the reality is, if you can sit here and watch my stream for hours a day, you're probably way more privileged in life than I was when I was 19, and I was able to afford a house. It wasn't the best house. It was it was like 100 years old, all right? And it wasn't in the best part of the city, and it was in Omaha, Nebraska. I didn't get to move to Miami or New York or LA or any of that, but it is possible, right? The problem is that like you've been delivered the world to you on social media. Like everybody has gassed you up and made you think that if you graduated with a 4-year degree, you should be able to move to Los Angeles, or you should be able to move to Miami, or you should be able to move to downtown Austin or LA or San Francisco. You have to be able to do this now. And if you can't do it right now and have a really great job and be able to afford a car and be able to have the latest iPhone and be able to do everything else, that like life is unfair and fucked and terrible. Like you want every single thing in the world and you're like 21 years old. You're like, I can't believe this. I'm 21. I can't afford a house. I can barely afford the iPhone 14 I just bought. I can barely even take out, Uber Eats and DoorDash twice a week. Like life is so hard for me right now. Like back in my parents' day, like, bro, you're clueless. I'm sorry. You can complain all you want, but I mean, at the end of the day, the numbers don't lie. I don't know what you want me to say.
Who sell starter homes to other owner occupants. That can increase the number of pre-existing homes on the market, but also risks increasing demand for housing. The Republican Party wants to address housing affordability too. Its 2024 platform says the party will reduce mortgage rates by slashing inflation, open some federal land for home construction, and also provide tax incentives for first-time homebuyers. In his campaign, former President Trump has criticized both Biden and Harris for the inflation that occurred during their administration.
Republicans have a plan to bring down prices and bring them down very, very rapidly.
His Agenda 47 platform claims that a Democratic administration would abolish zoning for single-family homes, allowing the building of apartments in suburbs and destroying property values in the process.
The alternative to all of this is, well, if you don't allow this to happen, the neighborhoods are going to change regardless. And the neighborhoods are going to be changing because now a developer comes and purchased an old single-family detached home, and they put in place a McMansion that really changes the character of the neighborhood as well.
No matter who controls the White House, the president will need to rely on the other wings of government to address the housing shortage.
There's no reason to think that housing supply is going to change that much. Ultimately, it's a function of the number of permits that are made available to the builders. The demand is going to keep increasing.
It's going to take time to really resolve that shortage that we have built up for decades. If the laws are complex and the land is not made available, they don't come out and build.
What do you think about housing prices rising much more than wages? I don't know what housing prices. Housing prices alone wouldn't be the only thing you would take into account. There'd be other things you'd be looking at, because you'd have to factor in housing prices and interest rates. Like, those are important. You would have to factor in. I don't know if you'd have to go sector by sector. You might be able to do median versus median. The thing is at the end of the day, like, you look at some numbers to try to figure out why something is fucked at the end, right? So for instance, if we were to see, wow, millennials or Gen Zs or Gen Xs can't afford houses, like, what's going on? Then you try to, like, dig through the data to figure out what's going on. But the problem is when you look at the end products, well, it seems like people are on track to own about as many homes as the last generation. So there's not really a problem in the numbers there. The only problem is on social media. It's people complaining about things. But then when you dig through all the data, it's like, okay, I don't know what people are complaining about, other than they have this expectation that at 22 years old, you should be able to graduate and buy a house, and have, like, a family of 4 and be totally fine on a single income, from a college grad. And, like, you should be able to do that at 22 years old. Like, that's what people, seem to think now. But it's never been like that ever in the history of the United States. You've just been brainwashed into thinking it is. So, I don't know what to say. Canadian housing crisis, incoming clip video. I can't speak to Canada's housing market. I don't know anything about Canada's housing market at all. They might have different problems related, or different than the US. They might have different situations. I can't speak to Canada at all.
As a result, pre-pandemic, the average mortgage payment was $1,100. It's now $2,300 because of an acceleration in interest rates and the fact that the average home has gone from $290,000 to $420,000. By the way, the most expensive homes in the world.
Median monthly mortgage payment. Where does he get these numbers from? I am so curious. I wonder if this is the median monthly mortgage payment for newly sold homes. Because I'm pretty sure under COVID, when the interest rates dropped, I'm pretty sure the more people than in the history of all of home ownership have had a lower interest rate, which should drop the prices on homes. I wonder if this number here, does anybody have a link to where this is coming from? This says,
based on 420. By the way, the fact that the average $100 in house.
Let me see where I can find this.
Out of reach, median home price has skyrocketed relative to median household income.
I love people in chat mad at skepticism. No, it's just this is the emotional vibe of millennials and Gen Zers. Vibes are also unfight againstable, but I like to be informed at least. Hold on.
Income. As a result, pre-pandemic, the average mortgage payment was $1,100. It's now $2,300 because of an acceleration in interest rates and the fact that the average home has gone from $290,000 to $420,000. By the way, the most expensive.
Like, what he just said there doesn't make sense. He has to be talking about new homes being sold, because a rising interest rate wouldn't impact monthly mortgages. It doesn't make any sense for people that already own homes. Wait, what is this guy's background? Fuck. I wish I could find where he's getting those numbers. Wait, hold on. CNBC. 1 sec. Let's check. This is the income versus average home values. Does this have this doesn't have the one thing. It would, wouldn't it? Because that number would include new homes and refinancing. Yeah, but you're not selling the majority of homes on the market. Most people that are in homes have lived there for decades, right? The vast majority of homeowners. Interest rates increasing shouldn't have a dramatic impact on monthly mortgage rates. New people buying homes at high prices will have an impact for sure, but that much of an impact in that short of a time period, I doubt it. What would we be looking for?
It's $1,100.
But the price of homes are still appreciating. It doesn't matter. If the cost of your house goes up, your mortgage payment isn't increasing. Please Please look this up before you talk about it. The average person can't afford to change their current living situation. Bye. You're permabanned. If you link something, if you want to link something, that's fine. Please stop crying. Stop the retarded fucking QQing. Holy shit. Every single time we look this up on stream, all the QQing in chat ends up being incorrect. And then people just get mad and like, oh, it doesn't show up in the data, blah, 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 blah. Economist guy talks about this guy. I don't want to just listen to a guy refuting him, though. I just want to know where he gets these numbers from. Bottom left is where he gets the chart here. Is that where he gets this?
$2,300.
The median monthly mortgage?
Because in pre-pandemic, the average mortgage payment was $1,100.
He's doing Investopedia and analysis of Redfin data. Redfin, monthly mortgage payment. Didn't we have near interest zero rates in 2019 compared to 2024? And mortgage interest rates were hovering around 6-7%. Yeah, I'm so curious how this. I'm just so curious how this number is calculated. Just read this analysis. Yeah, well, I don't want to just like watch or read a debunking video. I'm just curious how they calculate this number. Doesn't that include insurance and taxes? It shouldn't. No. Technically, your mortgage payment should just be it should just be your principal and interest. Although people might colloquially refer to it as your mortgage payment plus your escrow, because it's usually all in one payment, usually to the same person. But mortgage payments, when we talk about it here, should just be principal and interest. Look up ARM and jumbo. Adjustable rate mortgages, I think, significantly fell off in popularity after 2007. I don't think people do. Well, what percentage of U.S. homeowners have adjustable rate mortgages? %92% have fixed rates, 8% have adjustable rates. Yeah, okay. His source is his own analysis, but the source he gives for a slide is the link here. This is such a weird... Average pre-tax income. The issue with comparing kids from generation to generation is that kids today are entering the workforce at a later date than older people would have been entering the workforce. I would imagine that the financial health of a person at age 22, if you go back 50 years, is going to be better than the average financial health of a person today at age 22, maybe even at age 25. But if you go to age 35 or 40 or 45 or 50, then the financial health of these people is going to be better because obviously you're delaying your entrance into the workforce and you're front-loading debt to increase your lifetime earning potential. Ugh. Okay, wait, who is this Scott? Who is this dude? All of these groups are at age 25. Yes, that's what I just said. That college cost 100% does not include aid. $20K for college ain't the average out-of-pocket cost. Oh, true. Annual cost of public college as a percentage of income. 43% of 56K. Yeah, that's true as well. So this is also going by sticker price of college, which okay. This is all within the same year, January to December. Oh, no, wait, I see. It's 4 different years. It seems weird to do median or average house prices as a metric since real estate is a very regional market. For example, I mean, you can kind of do median to median. The only issue I think is the only issue is that you might have people who are living in homes that don't have to work anymore and own their home, but now their median wages would be dragging everybody else's down, and then the appreciation of real estate is increasing like the median home price, but now you've got people whose houses have appreciated in value, who don't have to pay a mortgage and whose income is lower because they're retired. So yeah, these types of figures. This is why it's good to do like a sanity check, I think, at the end and look and see at the end, like, okay, well, our home sales per generation actually like super negatively impacted or not? And it seems like in general they're not. So something else is happening that's Okay, I'm not going to find this guy's charts anywhere.
To productivity, it'd be about $23 a share, but we've decided to purposefully keep it low. Out of reach, median home price has skyrocketed relative to median household income. As a result, pre-pandemic, the average mortgage payment was $1,100. It's now $2,300 because of an acceleration in interest rates and the fact that the average home has gone from $290,000 to $420,000. By the way, the most expensive homes in the world, based on this metric, are number 3, Vancouver. Why? Because 60% of the cost of building a home goes to permits. Because guess what? The incumbents that own assets have weaponized government to make it very difficult for new entrants to ever get their own assets, thereby elevating their own net worth. This is the transfer I'm going to be speaking about. This has resulted in an enormous transfer of wealth, where people over the age of 70 used to control 19% of household income versus people under the age of 40 used to control 12. Their wealth has been cut in half. This isn't...
Wait, of wealth or of income? Wait, hold on.
Over the age of 70. This has resulted in an enormous transfer of wealth, where people over the age of 70 used to control 19% of household income versus people under the age of 40 used to control 12. Their wealth has been cut in half.
I don't even know what he's saying here. None of what he just said makes sense. First of all, it wouldn't be your wealth has been cut in half. It would be the share of wealth you have as a percentage might have been cut, but it could still theoretically be increasing. In fact, in this time frame, I'm guessing it probably is increasing, at least as an absolute value nominally, maybe not adjusted for inflation. Also, I don't understand, is he talking about income or is he talking about wealth here? Because these are two very, very different things.
Where people over the age of 70 used to control 19% of household income.
Share of household wealth by age. Does maybe wealth here means income? It's very confusing to use those two things interchangeably, but okay.
Versus people under the age of 40 used to control 12. Their wealth has been cut in half. This isn't by accident, it's purposeful. This is me at UCLA in 1987. I know your first thought is I haven't changed a bit. This is also Mia Silverio, who is the analyst who put together these slides. By the way, Mia is 26. I did the math. Just by virtue of her being in this audience, it brings the average age of the entire conference down 11 days. When I applied to UCLA, the admissions rate was 76%. Today, it's 9%.
Wealth is what you have. Income is your hour wealth. I don't know what that means. It must mean wealth, right? Are there that many people above 70 working? No, probably not. Yeah, that's why it's just a weird... I wonder how many people even were in this age demographic in 1989 versus 2023. I don't know if you could look up data for that. What did the population demographics look like in 89 versus 23? I have no idea. There's a number of reasons why I wouldn't compare these two things, though, or think you're getting any meaningful information out of them, but okay.
9%. I received a 2.23 GPA from UCLA. I learned nothing but how to make bongs out of household items in every line from Planet of the Apes. And the greatest public school in the world, Berkeley, decided to let me in with a 2.27 GPA. And that's what higher ed is about. Higher ed is about taking unremarkable kids and giving them a shot at being remarkable.
Oh, yeah, shit. Wait, has somebody already looked into this? Oh, shit, he has the graphs. There might be a valid point underlying those pie charts. Unfortunately, as is, they are terribly misleading. Yes, those in their 70s have a considerably bigger share of American wealth in 2023 than they did in 1989. This is partially because they put restrictions on housing, but there are other variables at play. Most importantly, there are a lot more Americans above 70 years old in 2023 than there were in 1989. Just take a look at the population pyramid. Okay, so this is what I would have been looking for. Nice. That's cool. So this is our 2023 versus our 1989. What is the absolute, or I'm sorry, not absolute, what are the percentage points of this population versus the baby boomers have aged? The proportion of Americans in their 80s has increased by 50%. Similarly, increases for Americans in their 70s and 90s. America is great over the last 40 years. It means Americans will result. He doesn't give the number. But I mean, we can add it up, I guess, if you want. Or actually, fuck it, we can just add it. On the male side, 3.6, 4.5, 5, 5.2. So 5.3%. Just on the male side in 2023, and then in 1989, it would be 2.3, 3.3, 3.5, 3.6. Okay, so almost doubled, or close to, like 70% increase. That's pretty significant. Okay.
And every year, it's gotten more expensive. Higher ed and homes, and the ability, not only is higher ed incredibly expensive, it's not accessible, because me and my colleagues are drunk on luxury. Incredibly expensive. It's not accessible, because
like, why would we even use, like, ignoring all the problems that I'm sure he's just using the sticker price here instead of like financial aid adjusted, like average payments or whatever. Why would we use top schools, an average admission rate at top schools? Why would we even use that? For college debt as a percentage of first-year income and then house price to first-year income, is he using top schools for this as well? I'm not even sure. This is such a weird...
Not only is higher ed incredibly expensive, it's not accessible, because me and my colleagues are drunk on luxury, and I'll come back to that. We've embraced the ultimate strategy. Me and my colleagues in higher ed wake up every morning and ask ourselves the same question when we look in the mirror. How can I increase my compensation while reducing my accountability? And we have found the ultimate strategy. It's called an LVMH strategy, where we artificially constrain supply to create aspiration and scarcity such that we can raise tuition faster than inflation. And old people and wealthy people have done the same thing with housing. All of a sudden, once you own a home, you become very concerned with traffic, and you make sure that there's no new housing permits. And here is a memo to my colleagues in higher ed. We're public servants, not fucking Chanel bags. Harvard is the best example of this. They've increased their endowment in the last 40 years and have decided to expand their enrollment, their freshman class, by 4%. Any university...
Why are we... I don't trust... I'm sorry. This guy might be a cool dude, but just based on the 3 minutes of data presentation here, I don't trust a single thing this guy says. I think I would have to fact check everything. This seems like a highly ideologically driven presentation. Why are we analyzing Harvard for this graph?
40 years and have decided to expand their enrollment, their freshman class, by 4%. Any university that doesn't grow their freshman class faster than population, that has over $1 billion in endowment, should lose their tax-free status because they're no longer in higher education. They're a hedge fund offering classes. My first recommendation, Biden should take some of that $750 billion earmark to bail out the 1/3 of people that got to go to college on the backs of the 2/3 that didn't, and give $1 billion to our 500 greatest public institutions, size adjusted, in exchange for 3 things. 1, they use technology and scale to reduce tuition by 2% a year, expand enrollments by 6% a year, and increase the number of vocational certifications and non-traditional 4-year degrees by 20%. Where does that get us? In just 10 years, that doubles the freshman seats and cuts the cost in half. This isn't radical. This is called college in the 80s and 90s. Another transfer of wealth. Look at what's happened to wages. Oh, they've gone up, not as much as corporate profits. There's a healthy tension between capital and labor, but for the last 40 years, capital has been kicking the shit out of labor. What do you think? Whoa, what about wages, right? They've gone.
Compensation of employees, an index of corporate profits after tax. I feel like it would be, like, even comparing like earnings of like top 1% or something, I think would be. It's just such a. These are just weird numbers to compare. Like it's just weird numbers to compare. Like Amazon posted no corporate profits until how many years ago? So they wouldn't have contributed positively to this, but obviously Amazon was one of the most important growing companies in the world. It's just such a weird it's just such a weird comparison. Why these two numbers?
40 years, capital has been kicking the shit out of labor. What do you think? Whoa, what about wages, right? They've gone up. Well, if you compare them to the S&P, they barely register. It's been an amazing time to own assets, but your attempt to get the certification or the income such that you can acquire assets, it's been...
I'm so sorry. I can't. This guy is a hack. I don't believe anything this guy says. The S&P 500 are like the 500 most valued in this index in the United States. Why would you chart that against percentage of median income? Like, even on just what these two things are, ignoring the fact that we're looking at values of companies versus wages, which is already kind of a weird thing to compare. Why would you? We're good. I'm good on this. Okay. This is retarded. This guy does politics. Okay, I'm good. Apparently there's a bad econ post on this. Half of the S&P 500 are not even the same companies. Yeah, true. You're not even looking at the same companies over the whatever, because things are swapping at the bottom. Yeah. I ran about Scott Galloway's TED Talk about how the U.S. is destroying young people's future. Disclaimer, I'd like to note that I do not consider myself an expert on many of the topics he talks about, or even economics in general, but a lot of what I'm saying is pretty easily verifiable and basic, and I'll try to be clear that I'm expressing my opinion and not fact when doing so, given my lack of expertise. None of what I say should be considered as the final authority on these topics. It's a Reddit post, for fuck's sake. The thing is, too, is that the Scott Galloway guy, like, he's saying some things that I think are agreeable, but I'm sure you could find better ways to illustrate how, like, the points he's making. Like, I think capital has increased a lot in power. I think this is why unions are probably more important today than they even were in the past, because capital is incredibly powerful today. The amount of money that you can make deploying capital is bigger today than it was in the past and whatnot. So I think there's important things, but comparing the S&P 500 growth to the median wages of society, that's such an astronomically stupid like choice of comparison. The first slide with data makes a claim about how pre-tax income, adjusted for inflation, has decreased across generations, from grandparents to parents to kids, and that cost of public colleges and home prices have increased significantly across generations too. First of all, categorizing generations by whether they have children or grandchildren is kind of nuts. It's a very wide overlapping range of ages. If he has actually fixed age ranges for each generation that don't overlap, oh, that's true too. I didn't even think of that when we looked at that graph. But I'm assuming he's just like saying he's grouping it by generation, but he was just using grandparents, parents, and children. That's my guess. I would hope. It's a very wide overlapping range of ages. If he has actually fixed age ranges for each generation that don't overlap and just made these categorizations for the sake of understandability to a non-academic audience, I still think that's the wrong choice, but fine. However, his claim that real income has decreased across generations is weak at best. Here's a working paper from the Federal Reserve that was published in February of 2024, 58 pages. Fuck that. And from the figures that start at page 35, shows that by almost every categorization they could think of, Gen Z earns more at the same age than every previous generation before them. There's some conflict here with Raj Chetty's work, but I don't have the time or knowledge to reconcile the two perspectives, but at best, the pre-tax income numbers Gallup presents are questionable at best. This got crossed out. His source is his own analysis. So by his own analysis, the average cost of public college is $56,000 to $24,000. I'm going to use numbers from the U.S. News page. He links a media post, which isn't the best, which might not be the most reliable source in the world, but it's probably, there's way better numbers you can link for this. I don't think that whoever posted this critique, well, I mean, I guess at the top he said he wasn't like an economist, to be fair. I wonder what the top response was to this. You can look up places that do like college information gathering on like costs and shit. Is a school board one website I'm thinking of? And then I think the government tracks some of these figures. You don't have to rely on a U.S. News article for it. List all the money sinks right now besides healthcare corpses. Money sinks for what? The money sinks in terms of wealth disparity. I don't understand what I don't understand what you're asking me. Older people are always going to have more wealth than younger people for a few reasons. One is they've had more time to build wealth, especially in the form of like having a house or saving for a 401k. And the second is that their earnings are usually higher. And at least until they hit retirement, my guess is going to be that their costs and debt should generally be lower. You shouldn't have to be like buying new cars, investing in education, and you're already through like buying a home and all the front-loaded interest on the mortgage. That'd be my guess. But older people in general should always have more wealth, more accumulated money or assets than younger people. That's like to be expected. That should always be the case. We need to not talk about housing ever here. All this is trigger the fuck out of everybody.
Are young Americans really worse off than their parents
and this guy might not even be American. Should we even trust him?
Are young Americans really worse off than their parents and grandparents, or is Scott Galloway just spinning a sensationalist tale for views? NYU professor Scott Galloway, also known as Prof G, recently set the internet ablaze with his provocative TED Talk claiming that the young in America today...
They're doing more poorly than previous generations.
But can we trust that Prof G is telling us the truth? As an economist and ex-university lecturer who tracks macroeconomic trends...
You know, owning a house isn't a bad thing. Who said it was a bad thing?
Like this for a living, I was intrigued and also pretty skeptical when I first saw this video, where Galloway presents a slew of charts as evidence that 1. Young people today earn less. 2. They face higher costs, and 3. They experience lower well-being compared to previous generations. Finally, to put the icing on the cake, if you will, Professor G even suggests that this is not an accident. It is all due to an
unbelievable transfer of goodwill, of well-being, and of prosperity from young to old.
So when concerned viewers asked me to fact-check this TED Talk, I dove deep into his charts and calculations, comparing them with data from leading experts about generational wealth in America. Surprisingly, my investigation revealed that while Galloway addresses valid concerns, the quality of his TED Talk is not what I expected from a university professor, mainly because he conveniently only uses evidence to support his narrative, shows us charts that mean something else than what he claims, and he frequently leaves out crucial opposing data. So to find out which of Galloway's charts are misleading and what crucial evidence he conveniently leaves out, let's dive into each of these arguments now, starting with Prof G's main argument that young people earn less than previous generations if we correct for inflation. To back up his claim, Professor G shows us 3 main pieces of evidence. The first is that
essentially, as we go down generations, we're seeing that for the last 2 generations, people are making less money on an inflation-adjusted basis.
Where Prof G shows us this slide, which shows us pre-tax income at 25 years for 3 different generations.
Oh yeah, this was about grandparents, parents. This was for, yeah, okay.
Parents, and slide, which shows us pre-tax income at 25 years for 3 different generations: grandparents, parents, and kids. Evidence.
So the huge issue with this is that the there's so many issues with this. So one is pre-tax income is obviously going to change dramatically depending upon what the depending upon things like, are you in school or not? Grandparents and parents probably less likely to be in school, so more likely to already be working. Maybe have already worked some years and have already boosted earnings a bit. Also, I don't know, is this including like everybody that's working or people that are working like certain types of jobs? Does this include part-time workers? I have no idea. Pre-tax income. Like even the numbers seem high. Like, are you telling me that at 25 years of age, across the entire economy, an individual is earning $56,000 a year? Like a 25-year-old? Isn't that higher than like the median income right now in the United States? Median income USA is $37,600 USD. I don't even know what number he's looking. I have no idea where any of these numbers come from. Okay, I have no fucking idea, but whatever. Okay, yeah, I was gonna say, because just looking at this, actually, this number actually seems quite high, but okay.
Pre-tax income at 25 years for 3 different generations: grandparents, parents, and kids. Evidence number 2 comes from a study by Harvard professor Ray Chetty and colleagues that was published in the prestigious journal Science. This study finds that from 1940 to 2016, the percentage of people that earned more than their parents at the age of 30 drops to about 50%. Finally, evidence number 3, people that earned...
What is this? Percentage of 30-year-old men earning more than their parents did at age 30. This must be adjusted for inflation, right? This, I feel like this is an okay-ish graph, maybe, to show how much I have the least problems with this one.
more than their parents at the age of 30 drops to about 50%. Finally, evidence number 3 is not about income, it is about wealth, where according to Prof. G,
people over the age of 70
Yeah, this one was just wacky for so many different reasons.
used to control 19% of household income versus people under the age of 40 used to control 12. Their wealth has been cut in half. This isn't by accident, it's purposeful.
So based on this evidence, which clearly shows that generations are earning less and less and have less wealth, Prof. G concludes that
This is a breakdown in the fundamental agreement we have with any society, and it creates rage and shame.
And yeah, of course, that sounds very logical, but is Prof. G's evidence actually any good? That is it somewhat scientific in the sense that it represents strong evidence from multiple studies, or did he just cherry-pick evidence to sell us his message? If we start with evidence number 1, we can immediately see a big red flag. The source for this table is Prof. G's calculations, but Prof. G doesn't tell us anything about these calculations, other than that he chose to compare income at the arbitrary age of 25, which is in itself a bit suspicious, given that previous generations typically did not go to college and therefore tended to earn more at such a young age.
Yeah.
Of course, in the spirit of the social sciences, I sent Prof. G an email asking for his...
Is wealth disparity as simple as retarded habits and compound interest? Isn't there financial data that's off limits to look into? I met so many poor people that wise up about spending. No, I think there's different reasons for it. I think that bad spending habits and everything can be a factor. There's probably also more things today that are competing for bad incomes, for bad spending as well. Like in the past, you didn't have to think about like Door Dashing and Uber Eats. So there's like more stuff there weren't app stores that were competing for your money in super negative ways. So there's probably more pressure to spend unwisely too, but.
Sources and calculations. However, sadly, he did not respond. Therefore, given that we do not know anything about Prof. G's calculations, this piece of evidence is simply not valid. Luckily, Prof. G's remaining piece of evidence that should show that younger generations earn less is a very reputable study by Harvard professor Ray Jetty and colleagues that was published in the prestigious journal Science. Indeed, this study almost finds that
And for the first time in the U.S.'s history, a 30-year-old is no longer doing as well as his or her parents were at 30.
More precisely, the study still finds that 50% of children born in 1984, so these are early millennials, earn more than their parents did when they were 30. But the trend was clear and very worrying. So yes, well-known research from a good journal by a respected author. These are all...
Well, although now that I'm thinking about it, well, like, would it make sense that if you were born in 1940, you should be out-earning your parents that were living through the Great Depression? Wouldn't that make sense? Maybe this is not. Maybe this wouldn't be a good... Maybe this is a really stupid chart. You've also got like World War II and everything is happening around here as well, which would also probably significantly impact earnings, I would imagine.
It's clear and very worrying. So yes, well-known research from a good journal by a respected author. These are all good signs because it means that the study has been seen and examined by a lot of people, and overall it seems to hold up. However, it is just one study, and typically in the social sciences we'd like to have multiple credible...
Can you tell me of a weird drink to order so I can impress the barista with my knowledge? Just order like a traditional drink, but like no different brands of like vodka. So go up and order like what's a cocktail with vodka? What's the most popular cocktail with, okay, Moscow Mule. Gross. That is vodka? Oh, I didn't even know that and I drank these. Big mistake. Okay, so do this, okay? Here's what you do, okay? Get a Moscow Mule, okay? But then most popular types of vodka to use with Moscow Mule, okay? But then know the type, be like, when I get that Moscow Mule, do you have Crystal Head or Ciroc Snap Frost? If not, Grey Goose is fine. I know you probably normally use that. Do that. And they'll be like, oh my God, wow. This guy knows everything about the alcohols, okay? There you go. That's my pro tip.
It seems to hold up. These are all good signs because it means that the study has been seen and examined by a lot of people and overturned. More precisely, the study still finds that 50% of children born in 1984, so these are early millennials, earn more than their parents did when they were 30.
Barista is coffee. Oh wait, fuck. Did he say barista? Can you tell me of a weird drink to order so I can press the barista? Oh, for some reason I process as a bartender in my head. I don't know. Get a hot chocolate, bro. It'll be awesome. What do you mean?
But the trend was clear and very worrying. So yes, well-known research from a good journal by a respected author. These are all good signs because it means that the study has been seen and examined by a lot of people, and overall it seems to hold up. However, it is just one study, and typically in the social sciences we'd like to have multiple credible studies before we accept something as potentially true. Sadly, Prof. G only cites this one study, so I went to look for other recent studies that shared this finding that young people today earn less than their parents. But This was quite difficult, and probably because to get all of this data for each generation earned over time, well, that's a lot of work. Nonetheless, I did find two credible recent studies. The first, this study from economists from the Federal Reserve that compares both average and median incomes across generations from multiple ages, but with a focus on ages 36 to 40. And the second, this study published by the National Bureau of Economic Research, NBER for short, which looks at average and median income, consumption, and wealth across generations with a focus on ages 26 to 34.
One thing that I would be careful of, NBER doesn't technically publish studies. They're just working papers. It's not actually a journal. It's just like a, I don't know if you would call it like a think tank or, I don't know what you would call this. Private, nonprofit research organization. So I don't know if, I mean, you could say publish, but it's not like published in a peer-reviewed journal. They're just papers, right? Just as a heads up, but not there's anything, he hasn't said anything incorrect, but be careful with that.
To 40. And the second, this study published by the National Bureau of Economic Research, NBER for short, which looks at average and median income, consumption, and wealth across generations with a focus on ages 26 to 34. In contrast to Prof. G's cited evidence, both of these other studies find that while progress between generations has slowed down, new generations still earn more than those before them. So are these studies right, and is Prof. G's evidence wrong? No. In fact, both of these studies cite Prof. Chetty's study with respect and don't claim that their result invalidate that study. So why are then these conclusions so different? Well, I found three big differences between these studies, which can explain this quite radically different conclusion. Firstly, the Chetty study, cited by Prof. G, looks at a very specific age, and a relatively young age, 30, while the other two studies look at ages above 30 as well. 30 is probably more representative than 25, which Prof. G looked at. However, it still suffers from the same problem to a certain extent, which is that younger generations stay in school longer and therefore start their careers later in life. Secondly, the Chetty study looks at income before taxes and transfers, while the Federal Reserve study looks at both income before and after taxes and transfers. And while the Fed study finds that for both of these measures, 36 to 40-year-olds are better off today, they also find that taxes and transfers help improve the situation of young people today, which could contribute to the more negative result of the Chetty study for people at 30 years old. Finally, the Chetty study just looks at...
Oh, because things like, I wonder when like the earned income tax credit started. I don't know why I agree with this. 75. Yeah, I wonder how significantly different those transfers are today. I don't know if he goes into it, but...
Whether or not children earn more than their parents, while the other two studies look at average and median incomes across generations. This could make a big difference if inequality in America increased over time, which it did. To see why, just imagine a simple scenario where 5 children earn...
Oh shit, fuck, that's true too. Yeah. Because grandparents or parents that don't have kids, well, they wouldn't be parents, are going to have different economic profiles than those that did have children, right?
A little bit less than their parents, while 5 children earn a lot more. In this case, the Chetty study outcome would be that American prosperity is slowing down. However, the other researchers would find that both the average and median incomes have still improved. But while generations are still better off...
Oh, he didn't even go in that direction, though. I still don't know when he says parents or grandparents for this study. Did he say, are they dealing only with people with children, or are they just using parents or grandparents as a shorthand for generations? Maybe they're just using a shorthand for generations. Confusing. Be clear.
Which it did. To see why, just imagine a simple scenario where 5 children earn a little bit less than their parents, while 5 children earn a lot more. In this case, the Chetty study outcome would be that American prosperity is slowing down. However, the other researchers would find that both the average and median incomes have still improved. But while generations are still better off in these 2 other studies, all 3 of them find evidence that growth between generations is slowing down. For example, while the Federal Reserve study finds that the real median income of millennials was 18% higher than that of Gen X, at the same age, it reports that boomers did 27% better than the generation that came before them. On top of that, the Fed study reports that the higher income of younger people may be skewed by the fact that they are increasingly living with and relying on their parents well into their 20s. Finally, while the NBER study finds that on average and at the median, young Americans are doing better than previous generations, this is not the case for the poorest in US society, where progress has stagnated. So in short, the second piece of evidence given to us by Prof. G is valid. However, for a university professor, it is really quite disappointing that he only picks a single study that seems to confirm his point, while ignoring the other recent respectable studies that go against it. Luckily, Prof. G still has a third piece of evidence, which is this chart that clearly shows that there has been
an enormous transfer of wealth, where people over the age of 70 used to control 19% of household income versus people under the age of 40 used to control 12. Their wealth has been cut in half.
But does this chart really show that there has been an enormous transfer of wealth from young to old? No, it doesn't. Instead...
This is such an unbelievably crazy... Especially because, like, how many people in this graph are becoming these people? Like, it's such a... This is probably the worst. I feel like without having a significant reworking of what's going on in my brain. Like this, the explanation he gets for this alone is enough to discredit basically every single economic take I could ever hear from this guy. Like I would never trust anything. Like it's not, to say that it's even a transfer between age groups is just weird too, because like all the people here are becoming these people here. So the idea that the wealth is being transferred away from these people here to or from these people here to these people here when they're actually becoming these people here, and the fact that he keeps conflating income with wealth is so dumb. And the fact that we're looking at like a totally different or not totally different, but a significantly different demographic of age distribution. This is such a horrible comparison. This is such a stupid, horrible chart, graph, not even picture, like Jesus.
But does this chart really show that there has been an enormous transfer of wealth from young to old? No, it doesn't. Instead, it probably shows us that America has gotten older. You see, to make this chart, Prof. G used this data from the Federal Reserve. This data shows the total wealth controlled by 4 different age groups in America. To see why this is not proof that there has been a transfer of wealth from young to old, let's assume that everyone just has a constant level of wealth. They do not get richer. Now assume that there is a really big generation of Americans that is bigger than the generation before them and bigger than the generation after them. The second assumption is true. There is a group like this in America, and they are called the baby boomers. Now, this chart here shows that in the year 2000, baby boomers were between the ages of 35 and 54. In 2010, they were between 45 and 64 years old, and in 2020, they were between 55 and 74. Now, as you can see in the Federal Reserve graph, from 1990 to 2010, when most baby boomers passed the age of 40, the under 40s lose a lot of wealth. Then from 2000 to 2020, the 40 to 54-year-old category loses a lot of wealth. And then finally, from 2010 to 2020, the people above 70 seem to control more and more wealth. Is that a coincidence? I doubt it. Indeed, if we go back to Prof. G's chosen years of 1989 and 2023, we can calculate that in 1989, baby boomers were younger than 40. But in 2023, quite a few baby boomers were already older than 70. So while I admit that one explanation for Prof. G's graph could indeed be that there has been a massive wealth transfer from young to old, a simpler explanation could just be that a really large generation, the baby boomers, just got older. What likely makes this effect even bigger is that as people get older, they build wealth. So if a really big generation gets old people overall will of course control more wealth. So in short, Prof. G's third piece of evidence is not evidence at all, because it can show us multiple things. Luckily, the NBER study that I mentioned reported that young Americans still earn more than previous generations did. They did a proper study on wealth across these generations per person. However, in line with their findings about income, the NBER study finds that younger generations are also still a bit wealthier than those before them, even though, quite worryingly, wealth inequality in America has increased a lot. So in short, Prof. G's evidence to support his claim that younger generations are worse off than those before them is very weak. His first piece of evidence only looked at the age of 25 and is based on his own calculations that we cannot verify. Just as bad, his third piece of evidence really does not prove that there has been a massive transfer of wealth, because it could simply show that America got older. And while this second piece of evidence is certainly valid, it's pretty suspicious that Prof. G only quotes one of the 3 respectable recent studies about this subject. But luckily for Prof. G, he might still be right that the young today are worse off than those before them, because even if they earn more and are still a bit more wealthy, they could still be worse off, because according to Prof. G, life is more expensive for the young today, because while the income and wealth calculations from the previous section have already taken into account inflation in general, as Prof. G says,
the cost of buying a home, the cost of pursuing education continues to skyrocket.
This disproportionately affects the young, since they are the ones that still need to buy an education or need to buy their first home. But are these effects really so bad that they offset the fact that young generations are still earning more than previous generations? In his talk, Prof. G does not give us any evidence that it does. He just mentions that an education is now much more expensive than it was when he was young. On top of that, he tells us that it's now more difficult to get into a good college. Both of this is true. And yeah, I think it's really good that Prof. G calls our attention to this, because it is clearly a big problem. However, he does again leave out 2 pieces of more optimistic evidence that run counter to his narrative. The first is that even though colleges today accept a lower percentage of applications, they still accept way more applications than when Prof. G was young. Indeed, as you can see here, younger generations are more educated than those that came before them, a trend that is, according to Pew Research, holding up for Generation Z so far. He also doesn't tell us that, luckily for our children, the terrible trend that colleges got way more expensive has recently turned a corner, as we can see here in this graph from the College Board. Finally, while one study is not enough evidence to be sure, the Fed study that I mentioned earlier does find that the extra income younger generations earn is more than enough to cover the increased cost of education, because these increased costs are typically only incurred for a couple of years, while the financial benefits of an education accrue over decades. So while I think Prof. G is right to talk about America's increased education costs and competitiveness of education as a serious problem for young people, he does not provide us with any serious evidence to show how bad it really is, and he leaves out some hopeful trends for our children, such as more people getting an education and costs falling in the last few years again. This worrying trend of cherry-picking data continues, sadly, when he talks about America's housing problem. To be clear, as I discussed in my video about housing, the exploding cost of housing is a very serious problem for younger generations. It could even explain why young generations are living longer with their parents, as reported by Fed researchers. However, what Prof. G leaves out is that, as you can see here in this graph, while house prices went up by a lot, interest rates went down by a lot. Of course, there is one notable exception, which is after the pandemic in 2022 and 2023, when interest rates shot up while house prices kept rising. Interest rates are really important because what matters for most people is not just the cost of a home, but rather the cost of a mortgage payment, which is heavily influenced by both house prices and interest rates. Prof. G knows this very well because he states that
pre-pandemic, the average mortgage payment was $1,100. It's now $2,300 because of an acceleration in interest rates and the fact that the average home has gone from $290,000 to $420,000.
But isn't it a bit suspicious that he shows us a long historical graph starting in 1985 when interest rates were really high and home prices low, but then he only looks at 2019 and 2024 for the mortgage cost comparison? If he wanted to present a more nuanced picture, he would have instead relied on research here, which shows that if you take into account both home prices and interest rates, house affordability was very bad in the 1980s when interest rates were super high, and in the early 2000s when the US was in the middle of a housing bubble, but where actually, it got a bit better in the 2010s thanks to super low interest rates and lower house prices after the crash in 2007. However, as you can see here, it does not feel that way right now because both interest rates and house prices are now very high. And that is not fair to the Gen Zers who are now joining the housing market. But it does not fit with Prof. G's story that housing just got worse for every generation. What he could have presented, though, is this chart, which shows that despite earning more, Gen X has a lower home ownership rate than boomers, and millennials have a lower home ownership rate than Gen X at a similar age. And while Gen Z had a promising start, the post-pandemic surge in interest rates and home prices might spoil that. So again,
This is the Redfin data that I was referencing before.
Had a promising start, the post-pandemic surge in interest rates and home prices might spoil that. So again, here my conclusion is that while Prof. G is speaking about two very big problems in America that hit younger generations especially hard, he has not shown us any evidence that this offsets the general finding that young people generally still earn a little bit more than the generations before them. Therefore, it also does not prove that there has been a massive transfer of wealth from young to old. But what about Prof. G's argument that
it would cost $11 billion to expand the child tax credit, but that gets stripped out of the infrastructure bill. But the additional $135 billion a year to Social Security, that flies right through Congress.
Or that
for the last 40 years, capital has been kicking
Wait.
$5 billion a year to Social Security, that flies right through Congress.
First of all, I feel like we're talking discretionary versus non-discretionary spending. These are prior obligations to Social Security that you have to meet. Of course this flies through. You have to meet these obligations. This is literally part of the non-discretionary budget of the United States of America. Non-discretionary meaning non-negotiable. You have to you have to make your Social Security payments. What the fuck? Child tax credit expansion is going to be part of basically, what would you call this? Tax policy, economic stimulus is a fundamentally different thing. They could change payouts, though. I mean, they could lower payouts to Social Security, sure, but it's a little silly to compare the two. Social Security is a thing that people kind of have in their head that they're relying on for their entire life. It's part of our non-discretionary spending. We don't even consider it when we talk about like the budget generally. Child tax credit expansion is a new program that you're trying to add, comparing these two things and saying like, oh, one is easy, it just flies right through, and the other, they're not even going to expand. Well, yeah, of course. One is a new policy that people are trying to expand and implement, and the other is a prior commitment that you basically made to senior citizens of the United States, of course.
Or that
for the last 40 years, capital has been kicking the shit out of labor. What do you think? Whoa, what about wages, right? They've gone up. Well, if you compare them.
Child tax credit is not new. The expansion of the child tax credit is new. Yes. I believe it was $2,000 or $1,000 or whatever was the child tax credit, and the Biden administration made it, was it $3,200? The expansion of the tax credit was new. Yes. Retard.
To the S&P, they barely register. It's been an amazing time to own assets.
Or quite a few similar arguments about Harvard not accepting many more people, or that the top tax rate's down since the 1970s, or that senior poverty is way down while child poverty is roughly stable. Well, some of these arguments are good and some of them are very bad. But more importantly,
if it's natural that old people will have more wealth than young people, why does Social Security exist? Why transfer wealth from the poorest people to the richest? Well, because hopefully it's going to happen when you, first of all, to talk about poor and wealthy, to talk about poor and rich in terms of wealth is just incredibly misleading. You don't have a good picture of a person by just knowing about their wealth. Like if I tell you, oh, this person's net worth is $1 million, you have no concept for if that's a lot or not much. Because if it's a 19-year-old, that person is fucking loaded. But if it's like a 79-year-old, that person's probably doing, what is the median wealth? If you take into account homes, it probably, would it be average? Percentage of senior citizens' net worth over 1 million. I wonder what this says 10% of retirees have 1 million or more in savings. Retirees mean 65 or just people not working? Also, this says in savings. Does that include assets like homes? If that's higher than I thought. If average and the median are very different on this. But regardless, whatever, my point still stands. If you're, I don't know what the numbers are, but like having $1 million when you're 75 is significantly different than having $1 million when you're 20. Also, I would say arguably your income is probably more relevant to how wealthy you are than the amount of money that you have saved. If I can show you a person who's 30 and he has $300,000 saved and his yearly income is 50K, he's doing a really good job at saving. If I can show you a 30-year-old whose net worth is 150K, but he earns 400, 500K, a year, he seems like he fucking spends a lot on crazy shit, but financially he's doing a lot better than the other person. So just wealth in and of itself is not like it just isn't a good indicator of anything. You would need like wealth plus income plus age to start to have a good picture of where a person is at, or like an overall snapshot of their financial health. Can you post OBS log files from both PCs to look at? Might help troubleshoot the issue based on NDI connection logs. I could try reinstalling NDI on this computer over here. Maybe I'm using a newer version on that over there, but I don't know. We'll see.
Despite Scott Galloway branding himself as Prof G, there's really nothing academic about these arguments. He's just giving us random examples of transfers from young to old without giving us any insight into how big these transfers are and whether or not they are offset by other big transfers the other way around, such as, for example...
Wait. I've worked with programming with NDI since its release. Wow. What version of NDI tools are on each machine? I don't have NDI tools on either machine. I just have the runtime. I wonder if I can see that in add remove programs. Hold on. It's NDI 6.0.1 over here. And it is 5.6.1 over here. Oh, maybe upgrading NDI would help. I'll do that after.
45 to 65 years old people paying the largest share of taxes in the US.
Do rich old people still get Social Security? I thought you had to qualify for that stuff. Yes, in fact, I think rich old people probably get more Social Security because your Social Security payments are based upon how much money you contributed, which is based on your earnings. And then if you take your Social Security payments later, you get paid a greater monthly sum than if you take them earlier.
The other way around, such as, for example, 45 to 65 years old people paying the largest share of taxes in the US. Indeed, the fact that the Fed study found that the income of younger generations looks better after taxes and transfers suggests that the transfer from old to young could be bigger than the transfer from young to old. In his defense, though, Prof G was convinced by this one study that young people are worse off in America, so in that case it did make sense to just mention a few examples of why that could be the case. But now that we have seen that it is not proven at all that this is the case, these arguments about a massive transfer just look like random examples which do not prove at all that there has been...
So more welfare for the rich... Well, I mean, they contributed more. A wealthier person is contributing more to Social Security than a poor person is as well, right?
These arguments about a massive transfer just look like random examples which do not prove at all that there has been an...
unbelievable transfer of goodwill, of well-being, and of prosperity from young to old
in America. However, even if it doesn't look like young people are poorer than previous generations, could Prof G still be right about his final point that today young people have lower well-being and happiness? To back up this claim, Prof G shows us
a bunch of graphs all headed up into the right.
The first graph shows us that self-harm rates among children from 10 to 14 have exploded, especially amongst girls. The second is that teens and especially girls are increasingly depressed. Then, young people and especially men are having less sex. Cumulative gun deaths are way up for very young children. Youngsters are more obese, and finally, in this depressing list, overdose deaths among the young are way up. Even if younger generations are better off materially, this will convince any human being with a heart that the world is a dark place for today's youth, right? No. Again, Prof G's charts are to my knowledge correct, but they are also again very selective, meaning that much like a politician, Prof G just looks at what he wanted to push as a story and then went out finding only graphs that support that point, while ignoring others that don't. However, if you take a more scientific approach and take a look at the...
I don't know what you're saying here. Your NDI 5, though, could also work better if you switched to using the screen capture HX instead of the normal screen capture. I don't know what screen capture HX means. Like you're saying right click, add. Right now I'm doing window capture. I don't know what screen capture HX means. Right click properties. My display. Oh, I'm doing a display capture. I can do DXGI desktop duplication or Windows 10 1903 and up. I've just got it set to automatic right now.
Key national indicators of child well-being from the US Federal Interagency Forum on Child and Family Statistics, long name, but we can also find many important graphs that remain fairly stable, like child poverty, which Prof. G briefly mentioned in his talk. But if we want to sell a story that kids are better off than their parents, we may also find many graphs that show that the life of children got better, such as less air pollution, less asthma, less water pollution, less lead in the blood of children.
Using OBS to transmit the video. Could you not use the NDI screen capture? I am using OBS to transmit the video, yes. Could you not use the NDI screen capture? Maybe, but I don't know, like if I want to like overlay like a video or do something on my gaming computer, I like to use OBS on this computer, so.
Less youth victims of serious violent crimes and more young adults finishing high school, where you may have noticed that I selected 6 graphs that go against Prof. G's point to prove a point, which is that Prof. G is not acting like a prof in this video, but rather like a politician trying to push a certain message. Now, that message may resonate with you. Actually, a big part of that message resonates with me, given that I myself have made videos addressing the housing crisis in the Anglo-Saxon world, or the fact that due to stagnant wages and inflation, the US economy may look great on paper, but really does not work for a lot of people. However, this video was never about trying to sell you a message. It was about trying to find out if Prof. G is acting like a prof, trying to uncover a nuanced truth, or as a politician trying to sell you a story. And there, my conclusion is that Prof. G's evidence for his main point that the young in America are doing more poorly than previous generations is very, very weak. Yes, extensive studies suggest that the rate of progress has decreased, that lower income people are no longer progressing, and that many people don't do as well as their parents. But both looking at the average and median current generations are still earning more than the generations before them. And there is no evidence that this is offset by increasingly expensive homes and colleges. No solid evidence that there is a big wealth transfer from young to old, and there is no evidence that kids today are overall worse off than the generations before them, even though they have face some very big problems. Therefore, my conclusion, purely based on this TED Talk, is that Prof. G is an interesting speaker, and his data is generally correct, even though he sometimes interprets it the wrong way. However, he acts more like a politician than a professor, often presenting only evidence that confirms the message that he is pushing, rather than providing us with a more nuanced state of research, which I would have expected from a professor. But yeah, this is just how it came across to me, because while I did reach out for comments to Prof. G's NYU email address as well as his team before publishing this video, I did not receive a response. Hopefully, he will still do so in the comments of this video. Lastly, I want to note that to keep this video watchable for the general YouTube audience, I wanted to stick to Prof. G's main arguments and main pieces of evidence that supported it. But of course, I went through all of his evidence, and for each graph about transfers from young to old, I made a judgment call whether or not it was any good, and whether or not it was part of his main argument, or just a side note. This is just how YouTube works, folks. I try to make my videos brief and to the point enough, such that it can be enjoyed by most. However, if you really love debunking and want to get an exclusive insight into how I make these decisions, which point to include and which to leave out, or if you want to make sure I did not cherry pick my points, I heartily recommend checking out my brief, exclusive follow-up video on Nebula, Economist Nitpicks Scott Galloway's Anti-Boomer TED Talk, a nerdy video in which I go through all of Prof. G's graphs about wealth transfers from young to old, many of which are very flawed or irrelevant, from which we can actually learn a lot, but it just didn't fit into this video. On top of watching that video, Nebula viewers can watch all of my videos ad-free in Nebula's new news page, and some of my videos, such as this one and the previous video about India, could be viewed a couple of days early on Nebula before they were released on YouTube. So if you're interested in my nerdy video fact-checking Scott's additional graphs, watch all of my content early without ads, and importantly, if you want to support...
I cannot wait for when Destiny realizes an encoding issue, not the bandwidth issue we were saying before. And what do you mean, what would the encoding issue possibly be? Literally nothing has changed on my gaming rig, on my computer over here. Why would it all of a sudden be having encoding issues?
These types of fact-checking videos, then please sign up to Nebula using my link nebula.tv/moneymacro, or the link in the description to get the Nebula annual plan for 40% off, which translates to just $2.5 per month.
Wow, fascinating. Okay, let me use the restroom real quick, and then I'm going to chat with the ads.
Let's just dive right in on the war on youth. Like, your contention.
Give me 1 sec. Be back. Hold on.
You and I have had a few discussions in regards to housing already, but I feel like I haven't really heard what your stance is in regards to the topic of income inequality or housing in general. I feel like I've heard tidbits, but I don't want to misrepresent you. So I figured I would just get a general idea of where it is that you stand on things. And I know, are you doing a research project on the topic of housing and inequality right now? Or
Fuck no. Somebody just linked the video. I made the mistake of watching it.
Okay. So then, fine. We can just go with where you're at based off of what you've learned so far, and then we kind of go from there. Is that fair?
Sure.
All right. So first, I want to get your thoughts on where do you think the general population is when it comes to housing? What is their level of insecurity? What is the level of insecurity you feel like people feel about the economy when it comes to housing?
Can you be like, are you talking about like being housing insecure, like as the metric, like for people that don't know that where they're going to sleep, or what do you mean by that?
What is the general feeling that you get that people have in regards to the housing situation? Is that clear?
Sure.
Basically, I'm asking you what you think people feel about the topic.
I think in the United States, and I can only speak for the U.S. I can't speak for Canada. I think in the U.S., I think the majority of people are probably pretty happy with their housing situation. I think there's a group of people, especially younger people, that are entering housing markets, especially younger people with debt, that are entering markets that are probably feeling pretty antagonized right now and very unhappy with the current situation. That'd be my general feeling.
Okay. So you feel like most people are happy with the housing situation. You feel like younger people who are coming in with debt are the ones who are a little bit more doom and gloom.
Yeah, in general, yeah.
And I want to just ask you one more detail on this. When you say people are generally happy with the housing situation, are you talking specifically about homeowners? Are you talking about renters? Obviously, I feel like renters would obviously be to some degree maybe a little bit less happy, but I don't want to assume anything. So when you say most people are happy about their housing situation, who are you referring to?
I was speaking broadly across the entire population. I think right now, I think we're at a decently high percentage of people that own the home that they're in, and I think that the vast majority of those people have lower rates as a collective whole than have ever had rates in the history of all of housing kind. And I think that the accumulation of asset value for those houses is increasing pretty quickly. So I think the majority of those people are pretty happy with where they're at right now.
Okay. Then I'll move on to the next one, just to get your stance. It's fine. Why do you think people are where they are when it comes to how they feel about the housing situation? And I want you to do both sides, for the people who are happy with it and for the people who are happy. Is it valid? Is it based off propaganda? Or is it a result of something completely different?
In terms of feelings, for the people that are happy, they probably don't feel all that great about it because an appreciation of asset value for a house isn't something that you can really feel that much because you don't have an easy way to pull money out of it, which is funny because that's why people that don't have houses say they want to be able to buy houses is to build wealth. So the people that are making huge gains right now in asset value aren't feeling it that much unless they're maybe retiring and like reverse mortgaging or something like that. Also, keep in mind, depending on where you live, if the asset value of your house is increasing, even if you're able to refi under lower interest rates and your mortgage payment is dropping, you might still have to pay overall a higher monthly payment depending upon how your county assessor does taxes. So the valuation of your property increasing and the additional escrow that you pay for your taxes might mean that you maybe even have a slightly higher payment. It just depends. I don't know how the math will work out per area. And then for the people that are on the losing end of the transaction, obviously, if you feel like you aren't able to buy a house or you aren't able to move into a place, you're going to feel pretty bad. Although I still feel like a lot of that is fed into with kind of like narratives in the media that don't necessarily map onto real life, especially as I see people talk about when I was a kid, what buying a home was like. And I know that was absolutely not even close to reality. So I think that the losers in housing transactions are very easy to see, and the winners don't even feel like winners necessarily because you have such a hard time pulling value out of a house. So I think it probably all that kind of contributes, and there's probably other things too. But
okay, when you say they're getting false representations of what things used to be like in the past, is that like one of the main reasons? Or is there any other reasons why you feel as though people might be unhappy with the current house? It sounds to me like. Wait, actually, let me ask this in two parts. One, for the people who aren't happy, do you feel like their general feeling of unhappiness is valid, meaning they're actually based off of real concerns, or do they have just a false representation of how things used to be or getting bad information from media?
I think over half is false representation. There's always reasons to feel some level of anxiety, but I think that people don't feel good when it comes to things like student loan debt, and then they compare themselves to where their parents were who had no student loan debt, who were earning jobs that they earned less over the lifetime, but I mean, it's harder to see that. And then I think that people have a misunderstanding in the past where they just think that like, oh yeah, like a single earner could earn enough money to buy a white picket fence house and pay for their whole family, and school used to be so much cheaper, blah, blah, blah. There's a lot of things that aren't really true. So it gives a misleading impression of the past, and then people are more down in the present than they should be. I think. So the majority of it comes from memery, I'll call it.
Okay, so what is the part of it that's not memery? Yeah, I know you mentioned student loan debt, but I'm just going to ask you all the details.
Part of it that's not memery. I think that the standard of living has increased pretty quickly, and I think there's probably new expenses that we have today that people in the past didn't have. So in the past, I don't know how much people were obsessed with keeping up with like the latest phone, like having a smartphone, and then the monthly payments associated with that, and any extra money you spend there. There's a lot more temptations in spending money today. Like it's easy to pick up your phone and do DoorDash or Uber Eats or whatever. Like these were temptations that didn't even exist in the past. There's just different types of money sinks, and there are more things that are geared towards like optimally draining you of your money today than there were in the past. So there's more temptations, I would say. And these are probably real concerns. These things kind of suck. And also the unaffordability inside cities is probably getting worse than it was in the past because so many people are trying to move to these places, and by the laws of physics, you can only fit so many people in an area. So that's probably also getting more difficult as well.
Okay. On this topic, what about the insecurity that people feel in regards to income versus their cost of living? Do you think that portion is valid?
Income versus cost of living. When we say cost of living, what are we including in here?
So basically, what people feel like they have to spend in order to be able to live decently, okay, considering the standard of living that people want to have. Do you think that in relation to how much they're making is balanced? Because I think the general consensus that I've seen online anyways is that people feel like the amount of money they make is not enough to keep up with what they feel like they need. And also what they want. Because I think at the end of the day, we're not robots. We're not just here to eat, shit, sleep. So people do want to be having some level of leisure. So let's just go with a reasonable expectation. Is that fair?
Yeah, I'm just not sure what that means exactly, and it's so varied for different people. I don't know what I'm not a college kid, so I don't know what the reasonable level of expectations are right now. I'm not sure. It's hard for me to say that. So, like, for instance, I think it's fair to be able to expect to spend money on recreation and fun. I think that if you think that you can go out and buy like cocktails every weekend, you're probably delusional unless you're at least like middle class or upper middle class, because that shit could get real expensive real fast. If you want to buy like a new outfit or whatever, or have like a cell phone, you should be able to afford these things, obviously. But if you're trying to get, I don't know. It would depend on what exactly a person is. I'm not sure. I don't know what we'd have to hone in on that, I guess, a little bit. Yeah.
Okay, then. So then, how about we just go bare bones? Cost of living versus income. So when people say cost of living, what do they normally refer to?
Big expenses are usually it's going to be rent plus your car payment, and then probably something like food and utilities, and then maybe student loans or something.
So let's just go with that. We're not even going to do. We're not even going to go into delving into like, what people would like to have for an ideal life. Let's just go to the general cost of living. So cost of living versus income that people make. Do you feel like the insecurity that people feel around that is valid?
It doesn't seem to be. I can't find that in like any end data point anywhere. Like, it seems like people complain about housing prices all the time, or people complain about unaffordability of things, but like it doesn't seem like nobody's going homeless, and housing prices are continue to rise, and the vacancy rates are still unbelievably low. So somebody's affording all these places. I'm not sure who it is, but it wouldn't surprise me if like the total percentage that a person spends on rent has increased a bit from where it was 20 years ago. I'm sure that number can be found somewhere, but it wouldn't surprise me if the amount that people are spending on rent has trended upwards, I think.
Okay. And what? So it seems like for you don't feel like it's valid based off the data you've seen. So why do you think people do feel a high level of insecurity in regards to this? Wait, actually, let me ask you: do you feel like people do feel a sense of insecurity about this topic?
Yeah, it seems like it. Yeah. Sometimes it feels like when it comes to like I was arguing with a guy the other day who, me, I hate this topic, so I'm gonna trigger everybody. I don't care. I feel like when I look at representations of poor people on the internet, it feels like middle-class people who are LARPing as poor people. And they say things that they feel like poor people probably experience, but I don't know if poor people have ever experienced these things. And the experience given just seems like really ridiculous. But maybe in some places it is. So like, for instance, people will come on and they'll talk about like, here is an argument I got into the other day that drove me crazy. People were like, owning a home. Now, I'm not saying owning a home or renting is better or worse. I'm just saying this is the example given. Somebody was saying owning a home is better than having an apartment, because if an appliance goes bad in an apartment, your landlord takes forever to respond. You know, that you, at least with a home, you can pay for a contractor to come out and do things, and a landlord might never respond to you, and a landlord might kick you out at any point in time, and they might cancel your lease at any point in time. And it's like, these things are possible, but overwhelmingly, I don't think that these are the concerns of people that live in, like cheap apartments. This was never a concern of mine or any of my friends growing up, or when I worked at McDonald's or the casino. They're like, oh God, we're going to randomly get kicked out of our apartment one day. Like, this just never happened. The most likely chance that would ever happen is when you're like renting a room from somebody, or renting from somebody who wasn't like an actual landlord, which is like whatever, and like living situations change. But like for apartment complexes and stuff, this just generally doesn't happen. But so I don't know if, and I can't find this in data anywhere. So I get people that show up who are largely middle class or upper middle class and say, oh no, this is actually a huge concern. And it's like, okay, I don't know what to deal with that. So I don't know how much. It's kind of like when people say like, oh yeah, like you got to be really careful with the cops because they might kill you at any point in time, or like any pullover with a cop could result in you getting shot and killed. And it's like, I mean, this can happen, but like, Jesus Christ, it feels like we're exaggerating the of it on just one end. That's Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So I'm just taking notes.
Sure.
All right. What do people get wrong in regards to housing, income, cost of college, or a lot of their feelings around these daily things? Now, maybe these are all different things that they're getting wrong, generally speaking, but my experience is just that people feel general insecurity about most of these things that people are paying for, be it college, be it housing, all these things. And so, do you think there's an overarching thing that's contributing to this in terms of why people feel this insecurity?
I think there's two big things. One is obviously social media, so people can communicate about their anxieties more than they could in the past, which makes other people feel anxious. And then two is the fact that more and more people are having to go to college to compete in the job market. And college is like a slingshot. Like you pull it back. So you have to spend the first 5 or maybe even 10 years of your working life in a worse position than people in the prior generation did. So college is slowing down a whole bunch of things. You're marrying at later ages, you're buying a home at later ages, you're front loading debt in your career. All of these things are happening. And then when you look back at well, what was my mom and dad doing at 23? They already had started their family, and I'm 23 and I'm just barely getting out of college, and I might even have to go get my JD, or I might have to go do something else, and it's okay, that's true. So earlier in life, you might feel a little bit shittier, but the reason why is because you're enabling yourself to make more gains in the future, right? Your overall lifetime earnings are going to be much higher. You're just front loading a lot of the investment basically in yourself. But that feels shitty initially, especially when you've got social media to complain with other people about it too. Yeah.
Okay. That's good. And I think this is my second to last question. What do you want people to know about this topic, and why would it be important to them? So when it comes to the difference between how people may feel versus the actual reality, what is that you'd want your viewers to take away from this more than anything?
School is still really important. You need to go to college. You need to get a degree. It helps you be competitive in the job markets. School is nowhere near as expensive as people think it is. The majority of the people online that complain about how expensive school are very rich people whose parents paid for their school, so they're just pretending to struggle with it. Usually, except for in some circumstances where you can get like the idea online that the average person is leaving school with $100,000 in student loan debt and crazy is just not the general story. These people have mom and dad pay for their school, and then they look at the bills and they assume that this is what everybody pays. There's a ton of resources to assist you. You've got federal student aid, you've got state student aid, you've got local grants and scholarships, and there's all sorts of stuff to look out for. And it's really good to go to your financial tuition office or whatever and exhaust the fuck out of those things, rather than assuming that any normal human being in a lower middle class or working class family is going to have to pay $40,000, $50,000 a year to pay for their education. That's just not the general case. Also, I don't know 100%. I think I read something on this recently, but I could be wrong on this. The economic advantage conferred by Ivy League degrees has substantially declined as well. So as long as you're going to a decent state school, you're fine. You don't have to go to the biggest, bestest schools in order to make a good paying job these days. Yeah.
Okay. That's on specifically schooling, which is fair. I wrote that stuff down. But what about the other two topics, which is, I think, income inequality and housing?
I think those two other things are fed into by the schooling stuff. For housing, you're starting everything in life a bit later, so it's going to feel like everything is a bit shittier. It's going to take you a little bit longer to save up for and buy a house, especially when you're carrying the student loan debt. And the income inequality might feel kind of bad too, but that's largely driven by age right now. You shouldn't expect at 23 to out earn somebody who's 40, 50, 60. These guys are decades into their career. That's just never going to be the case. When you're 40, 50, 60, you're going to be dramatically out earning people that are younger than you. You should always be comparing within generations. Even if you want to compare to older groups, you should compare to when they were your age working, not where they are now. You're just always going to be learning or earning less than that. Yeah.
All right. And since you brought this up, I wasn't going to talk about this, but
go for it.
What about not student loan debt, but just the cost of tuition? Do you feel like the amount that they charge now in relation to the return on investment, has these things has the inflation aspect of it been reasonable for you, or has it made a lot of these things kind of because I know you said basically stay away from Ivy League schools, stay away from the more expensive ones, even community college will do more than enough. But I think a common gripe that people have is that a lot of the schools that they want to go to are incredibly expensive and inaccessible to them. What do you think about that level of insecurity that people feel?
Not everybody's going to be able to afford to go to the best schools in the country or to go to the best Ivy League schools. You shouldn't even Yeah. I mean, that should never be an expectation. College is still a really good deal right now. It still pays off a lot, even assuming some debt. Yeah, I mean, it's still like,
okay.
Yeah.
Let me rephrase the question. You say it's a good deal. Do you agree with people when they say it's a much worse deal today than it was for their parents' generation?
No, I don't think so. I don't know if that's substantiated anywhere. Wait, are you still here?
Yeah, I'm just writing these down.
One of the most difficult parts when teasing apart college stuff is looking into like how much people are actually paying, because that's where like most of the trickery is done when people are trying to figure out, like people look at like the cost of tuition and they're just going by like the cost, like the sticker price of whatever the college charges, and they're not looking at like the average cost that students pay or anything. So people have like wildly different ideas of what college costs. And in my opinion, most of the people who talk about super ultra high cost of college were never poor. They were always decently wealthy. Like Candace Owens, like that. When I was talking to Candace Owens and she said something about like coming from a really poor family, so college was like super unaffordable to her. And then she was like, and I was like, wait, what do you mean? I don't understand that. And she's like, well, what do you mean? We were really poor, so I had to take out a ton of loans. Like the fact that was her go-to, it was like very obvious to me that she was LARPing as a poor person. She probably was always super wealthy, grew up super wealthy, or at the very least had somebody funding all of her stuff. And then this was all super true when I looked into it afterwards. But like, yeah, that's what it feels like most of the time. The middle class people online, for whatever reason, feel like they want to LARP as poor people, and then they talk about dumb shit. To be clear, I'm sure there are probably some people that are. I'm sure there is in every generation. Like I'm sure there are some people that are genuinely. If you go to school and you don't graduate, you are super. If you somehow get through the FAFSA process, if your parents are high earners but high debt holders, like you're pretty on student loans. If you end up choosing a bad major, or you're indecisive and it takes you 6 or 7 or 8 years to get like your bachelor's, you can get. There are definitely people that can get. But yeah.
Okay. On your topics, well, I mean, listen, I feel like the stuff that you said on this topic sometimes has been unpopular. What do you feel like people get wrong about your stance on this matter? I know we've covered a few broad things, but what's like annoyance that you have when you're covering these topics that you just see in regards to how people respond to it?
Most people just don't have any of the numbers, any of the data, and most people just lie about their living circumstances. I don't know what else to say. I think my positions are pretty good. People just spam. I think the clearest thing that I saw of this probably the other day was I was arguing with a guy who was talking about how it was so funny watching Chat 180 on this, but because they're mostly wealthy white kids. Some guy was arguing with me about how I was saying that if you lose your job and you're renting or whatever, like the worst thing that can happen is you get kicked out of your apartment, and that sucks. But like if you have a larger financial liability, like a mortgage, if you lose your job and you have trouble finding a different one, you might go like bankrupt, or like if you get foreclosed on, there might be much more significant financial penalties for you. And everyone in chat was saying, I'm retarded, I'm coping, this never happens, it's stupid. And then the guy that I was talking to says, well, this is super rare, it never happens, blah, blah, blah. And then I bring up, right, everyone in chat was saying this, like they are now, by the way. And then if I say something, and then later on I reveal, okay, well, yeah, this happened to my family, right? When my mom quit her job at daycare, we were kicked out of our first house. My parents had to file for Chapter 7 bankruptcy. This was a horrible ordeal that probably set my parents down a path of financial ruin that they never recovered from. Now all of chat switched to, it's because he's just really now he's really emotionally invested in this. That's why. It's because he's too emotionally blinded by it. So it went from, you don't have any experience, so you can't even talk about this, to, well, you have experience, so now you can't talk about this. So I don't think anybody's mind lives in any part of the real world. And then when I see post after post on my subreddit, to be fair, anecdotal, okay, and maybe these people are even lying, but people will complain like, I don't have time for anything, or this life is so hard. And this guy who like works out for 1 hour every single day, or people who like work from home 2 days out of 5 days of the week, is like, holy shit. Or like people who are making like 100K plus a year at age like 23. I'm like, Jesus Christ, like these people think their lives are really bad. And it's like, bro, what the yeah, I don't know. I just don't believe any of the sentiment I see online. I need numbers and data to back it up.
Okay. Good. Okay. Gotcha. Anything else?
No. I'm sure there are issues and there are things that we should target, things that we should do, but the situation is way more dire than people make it, so it's impossible to even talk about. People over exaggerate the out of like BlackRock buying up homes, or people buying homes and not even living in them, they just sit empty. These aren't real problems in the current housing market. They don't contribute significantly to any of the problems. It's all just like cope meme shit from people that are too far to the left that want to blame capitalism or institutional investors for dumb shit. The reality is we just need to build more homes, and it's really hard to do that for a variety of reasons that are really difficult to overcome, like the fact that homeowners are like a big part of your voting base. So, but yeah. You said something at the beginning of that. Would you start off with? People think that like institutional investors like BlackRock or whatever are fucking over that.
Oh yeah, you said the situation is dire, but
or not dire, but I think for some people it could be pretty fucked. There are things we can do maybe to help some people, like zoning up zoning, like higher density housing is really important. Fuck off with the single family
I was
home
like
shit.
surprised because every time people would bring up BlackRock, or like obviously it sounded horrible hearing that like some giant hedge fund owned like a massive amount of property all across the states. But then I looked into it, and they own like a very small percentage of that.
Correct.
Yeah. So when you looked into it, is that actually true that they own a very small amount of the actual?
Yeah, it's always a really small amount. Yeah.
Okay. So
which is still maybe not good, maybe good, but it's certainly not explaining the majority of the housing prices, right? It's not accounting for a significant percentage of any of it. So.
Yeah. I don't know. My sentiment, at least like over the last 4 or 5 years, seeing like the rent prices just double in my area. I know you said people need to maybe move away from cities, but withstanding all of that, considering how high the rent prices have gone, do you still feel like rent is as good of an investment as it used to be? Because I know you mentioned the foreclosing of your parents' home, and sometimes buying a home can be a horrible investment in case of like bankruptcy. But yeah, I want you to answer that. Like, do you feel, considering how expensive rent has gotten in many places, in major urban areas especially, do you feel like it's still a good investment?
I mean, it just depends on if rent is going up, that means mortgages are going up too. If mortgages are going up, that means interest rates that you're paying, like the absolute value interest you're paying is high too. Like, I think that buying a home could be a good decision as long as you want to buy a home, like you want to live in a home, you want the value of that, and as long as you're sure you're going to stay in an area for at least 5 years. But if you're not sure about those two things, then you almost certainly should rent instead.
Got you. Okay. All right. Well, listen, you gave me a lot, so I'm going to go do my research on all the different points, and then we can have a different discussion on this after I actually read up on this shit.
Okay. I love you. Be careful.
Yes. Oh, wait. I'm going to send you something. If you could sign it, it's regards to the whole visa situation. For me.
Wait, what am I doing?
Remember the visa stuff you helped me with before?
Oh, okay. Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you, boss. Oh, yeah. I'll talk to you offline.
Be careful.
Peace.
Okay, are we done with these memes?
Overriding feeling that you get from watching the DNC is these people are so pathetically fake, with fake joy. Joy, 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 joy. And it really is like Ren and Stimpy's happy, happy, joy, joy. And there's something peculiarly sinister about people telling you that there's just joy everywhere.
Could two casino workers buy the same house you bought today, making around the same wages adjusted? I don't know. My pay was $15 an hour, and I worked around 60 hours a week. With 20 hours a week that I worked, overtime was $22.50 an hour. So it would be 15 times, we'll say 28 days. It would be 15 an hour times 40, 80, 160 times 160 plus, so it's 2,400 plus, it would be 80 times 22.50. 1,800 plus, what was the other number? Was it 2,400? So this is, so I was making around 4,200 times 12. This is per month, right? This is pre-tax. USD in 2008. Adjusted inflation today. Why can't I just calculate it for it? Just Google, just do it. If in 2008, inflation calculator, bro, just third link. Okay, what is this? So this would be the equivalent of around 73.6K today. And then I think I bought my first house for well, I was also living with Rachel, so it would have been her income added to this. Would have been for 115K. I think is what I bought my first house for, or was it 105? It might have been 105. So the question is, earning 73.6K per year, could I have bought a $167,000 house for today? Yeah, I think probably for sure would be my guess, right? But that's assuming all the adjustments for inflation go up evenly and everything. Who knows if the average wages have gone up like this, or if it's hard to say. Who knows? Yeah. But also, like, there are no 160K homes today. Omaha, Nebraska, Zillow. I'm trying to think of where I lived. Oh, fuck me. It was right off of I-80 on 42nd? The fuck house is here? Oh, okay. I was going to say, Jesus. So this is for 250K, 230K, 270K, 260K, 275, 220. So these houses do exist. Yeah. I don't know why you would say there's no houses like this. 190K. Not the best house, but 230K. Why'd you decide to buy a house at that age? I just didn't like living in apartments. And I think Obama had the first-time homebuyer credit. So yeah, why not? But I was willing to live in kind of like a shitty-ish area. Limfeo, big difference between 160 and 250. I can find 160. Here's 190K if you want. Like, we can go and look for, like, I mean, if you want, we can do under maximum. I don't know why you're spamming like you think you've made a point, right? And we'll do minimum 100K to get rid of whatever the fuck weird things these are. So let's see. We've got a lot. These are empty lots. Can I kill lots of lands? Get rid of this shit. Let's get rid of, I'm assuming apartments are condos, manufacture. Condos, fuck that, fuck this, fuck this. So we'll just look for houses. So 140, 145, 120, 149, 150, 160. Okay, eat it. It's a completely regional issue, and just moved to Nebraska shouldn't be any normal advice for anyone. Good thing I haven't told anybody to just move to Nebraska ever. This was a question about how did I buy my house? What was I doing? And I just told you. There you go. Genuine question. Those houses probably need a ton of work. Holy shit, they look awful. Yeah, it's not the best house. Sure, yeah. But this has always been the case. This has always been the case. When I was a kid, nobody bought a $100,000 house. It was amazing. It was all luxurious, the best appliances. Like, that just didn't happen. You're delusional. You're fantasy. You think that people in 1980 spent $80,000 and they got this majestic 3-bedroom house with 3 full bathrooms and like a huge yard for their dog to run around. Like, it's never happened. It's not true. A stone's throw from the beach. What was your job when you bought the house, and what was the average wage in 2024 for the same job? Wouldn't that be a better indicator? What was your job when you bought the house? I was like a lead/supervisor in a casino diner. I don't know what the average wage in 2024 for the same job would be. I don't know. For a lead supervisor position, I don't know. It was probably comparable. But I was probably out earning other people my age because I sacrificed college to do it. I ended up flunking school and quitting college because I couldn't do school and work at the same time. I was also working a lot of overtime as well. You literally said earlier people should maybe move away from cities. I said you shouldn't plan on moving to like a top 10 city. That if that's like in your plan, that's fine. But know that if you want to be a top 10 city liver, you need to be a top 10 earner. If you're just like a person that has like a 2.7 GPA and you think you can go to a state school and then live in downtown LA, I'm sorry, but it's just not for you. The world can't be constructed in a way to make that possible for everybody. Like, sorry, I don't know what to say. It sounds shitty, but like, it's never been that way ever, and it will never be that way. Yeah, so just moved back to what I said and got banned for. It's not advice for anyone. Good ban, bozo. I can't speak to wealthy kids whose mom and dad pay for everything. I'm sorry. When I was poor, there were two things that you could do to control how much money you had available to you. It was to reduce the cost of living by reducing your rent, or reducing the cost of transportation by getting a fuel efficient car or a cheaper car. Or buying a used car. Those were the two major things you do. I don't know what exists in your life today where moving is not an option and you have to live in a particular city or region, or you have to live in a particular area. Maybe my expectations or my standard of living were a lot lower. That might be the case. That in my mind, maybe I was willing to settle for less and you guys have higher expectations, so it's different. That might be the case. But at least for the people that I knew, the area that I moved into, and the people that I worked with, the idea that like you have to stay in one area for the entirety, for the rest of your existence, you can never leave, you can never move, you can never do it. Like I don't know what that idea means. I've never, I don't know what that is, and I don't know anybody who knows what that is, or at least growing up. Maybe that is the expectation now, but I don't know. But hey, listen, figure it out. Good luck. How far did you travel for your work? I don't know, probably 15-ish miles, maybe. I don't know. Who lives in Omaha? Originally, I lived off of 108th and Maple. 42nd and Center to the interstate. If you hop onto I-80 at 42nd Street and then you drive to the Horseshoe Casino, I think now it's Caesars or something, it's probably a 15-minute drive, I think. Maybe 10 or 15 miles? I'm not sure, because it was all interstate. Maybe 10 miles? You still have your house? No, I sold that house. I have another house, but Rachel and Nathan live in that house.